Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea. The Trump train. Anyone remember it? And specifically how hard it steamrolled along last year leading into this. You know, all the promises about how the economy was about to get 300% better, how the DOJ and FBI were going to be the most transparent that the American public had ever seen, and also how the crooks of the prior 4-year reign of terror were going to be brought to justice. Weren't we all suckers for that kind of stuff leading up to November of last year? Well, friends and neighbors, here we find ourselves 1 year past those proud and boastful promises, and I believe firmly at this juncture that this administration has now gone wildly off the rails. Yes, folks, the Trump train has now derailed into a tangled mass of mangled steel, and the bloodshed is only about to begin. What this puppet is seeing is nothing more than a bloated ego drinking the wine of his own pride and imagined victories to date. We now see President Trump arguing vehemently with his former MAGA advocates over the now demanded release of all files and names associated with one Jeffrey Epstein, including probably his loudest cheerleader leading up to last year's general election, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. As surreal as it would have seemed only 1 year ago, we now see the president publicly denigrating his former biggest supporters almost daily on national media. He is going full-on scorched earth policy on the majority of his avid backers, and the end result is not going to be well for old Donald. Just saying. Marjorie Taylor Greene has rightfully decided to stand with numerous women who were victimized at the now infamous Epstein Island, and in calling for the immediate release of the files in the client list, has even now received death threats. What? Yes, you now have one of the greatest patriots this nation has seen in decades being threatened for calling for the release of the names of filthy criminals. I don't know about you, but that smacks highly of the Jewish-Israeli mafia being involved in the Trump cover-up of the Epstein client list. It is widely known that Epstein was an operative of the Israeli intelligence department, and hence you now have mega-wealthy Jews galore decrying anyone who states the truth about the connection as haters, Nazis, and the dreaded anti-Semite. Gasp! Please don't call me those hurtful names. So, kids and cousins, I think it is safe to say that Donald Trump has either received the Jewish mafia payments or has received the Jewish mafia threats to himself and his family. Either way, he is now nothing more than a compromised puppet in the White House, much like the criminal we just kicked out of the same residence. In fact, it now seems that Trump is so enraptured with himself that he thinks he does no wrong, quite literally, and as such, he makes no apologies for any of his now increasingly staggering misjudgments or gaffes. In the same vein, we have now found out from fellow patriot Tucker Carlson just this week the truth about Butler, Pennsylvania shooter Thomas Crooks. You know, the truth that the FBI and NSA purposely covered up just last year. Move along, nothing to see here. Modus operandi of the federal alphabets from everything we have seen for almost a century now. Carlson revealed that despite the lies we had previously been told by the FBI, Crooks did in fact have a social media footprint, and quite an extensive one at that. In fact, it turns out that he originally was making death threats online against anyone who opposed Trump and the MAGA movement, then at some point turned opposite and started making death threats against Trump and the MAGA movement. But all the FBI released was that the Crooks was supposedly a Republican right-leaning individual with no social media or online presence. What a crock. Of particular interest was the fact that Crooks made numerous threats to public figures on YouTube over the course of a couple years, and never did he receive a phone call or a knock on his door from the FBI, and all at a time when social media was being monitored more than ever by the federal government. People were getting locked up for posting threatening memes, and yet Thomas Crooks publicly posted all kinds of violent threats, along with also having searched a number of alarming phrases on leading internet search engines, such as, "How do I escape quickly from an assassination scene?" and "How to make a bomb." I'm not making this up, folks. Go into Tucker Carlson's YouTube channel and you can see for yourself. Trump campaigned on revamping the corrupt DOJ and FBI of Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray, but so far that revamping has simply not happened. After taking office in January of this year, Trump made a token attempt at making us somehow believe his intent was to make good on his campaign promises in naming Kash Patel and Dan Bongino to head up the supposedly newly transparent FBI. What a joke it was, and continues to be, though, folks. It is now plain as day that Patel and Bongino are nothing more than Trump yes-men, afraid of either bully Trump himself or the threats of the aforementioned Jewish mafia. What else could explain the lackluster efforts from Patel's FBI to date? In fact, friends and colleagues, it made the news shortly into the new administration that Dan Bongino required 24/7 security outside his home as there were death threats made on him for some of the initiatives the new FBI were trying to undertake. Who made those threats? Operatives of the now known stronghold of Israel? Rather telling now is also an interview Patel and Bongino gave to Fox News' Maria Bartiromo earlier this year. In that interview, Patel and Bongino both allude to a lawsuit keeping them from divulging any information relating to Thomas Crooks and the Butler, Pennsylvania shootings. Okay, but what litigation were they referring to? Crooks was dead by that point, was he not? Folks, Donald Trump is getting nervous because the House of Representatives is getting ready to take an up or down vote on whether or not to call for Epstein-related information to be made public. So due to his increasingly insane war to keep all that information hidden away, he is now openly slandering anyone who calls for the complete release of it to the American public. Now, this vote will not be binding until the Senate also votes on it, and the President himself then has to sign the bill in order for it to become law and take effect. Of course, you and I both know that anyone who publicly on the record votes against us will look like complete schmucks and risk political suicide, including the President himself. And so, right in the midst of all this, the President himself decided to attempt to distract from his own inadequacies by ordering Attorney General Pam Bondi to begin an investigation into well-known Democrats involved with Jeffrey Epstein and his infamous island. Let's get this. Trump does not want the client list released, but is trying to prosecute political enemies for potential crimes committed at the island. This man is out of his gourd, folks, plain and simple. While I firmly believe that anyone who frequented that island and had dealings with Epstein needs to be investigated and possibly brought to justice for any crimes they may have committed, it needs to not only be limited to only a few prominent Democrats, though. Let the files loose to the public and allow the proverbial dust to settle where it may, Mr. Trump. Lastly, folks, I will mention the economy in closing. Trump has done nothing to date to bring highly inflated prices down. Nada. In fact, his tariffs have most likely added to the upward spiral in the price of consumer goods overall, and just at a point when wages are more stagnant than ever, and most Americans are struggling to make obscene monthly rent payments. On and on goes the Trump train, and now look at the mangled mess it has become. Good night, my loyal viewers, and sleep well.